Alright, kind of just a little look on what we got going here. You know, I zip tie everything with a zip tie in between like that just to be able to keep space. That way that I know. I also like to face any metal couplers like this or worm clamps. Try to face them away from many hoses. But there's the run of hoses through there, kind of nice and orderly. Cleaned it all up. I've got those isolated, cleaned up down there. So we're really going for the install now. I'm going to hit some electrical, but this thing's going back together. I swapped out the throttle cable also just because why not? Put a new throttle cable in here off that other sled. It looked like it was in better condition. But yeah, we're going to be going for it here pretty quick. I'm doing some electrical. I mean, I'm just gonna give it to him. This, you know, this is probably built back in like 2013, 14, like 10 years ago. I think this is just RTV slathered on. So again, I know they were probably in a hurry. They didn't, probably working on it late at night like I am, and didn't want to go to a hardware store. But this is a relay. And relay, in case you guys ever saw this and it's like, oh my gosh, one of those confusing electrical things. This is not very confusing. It's pretty simple. All this does is this gives 12 volt power to whatever piece of equipment we want. So for instance, I'm going to run the fuel pump with this. So I'm going to run 12 volts of power into this. I'll run 12 volts of power out of this. And then there's a little electromagnetic relay inside of there. And what the idea is that I can use a little pulse of electricity, like extremely low amperage from the electrical system. And I can use that low amperage to open the relay or close the relay, whichever I choose, depending on how I hook it up. And when I open the relay, it will open the connection between the battery and whatever I want. So for instance, I don't want the fuel pump running all the time. I only want it running when the motor's running. So I'll hook the relay up to the ignition so that when the motor's running, this relay will get just a little bit of power. And that little bit of power will open the line up from the battery to the fuel pump. So whenever the motor's running, the battery will be running the fuel pump. That's kind of what we got going on here. But the quick version of what this is I'm sure they built this in like 2012. I'm sure they were doing it in the middle of the night. I'm sure if you know about relays, it's like, oh, I'll just throw a relay on there and a bunch of RTV. Darn it, that's just such sloppy work though. That's kind of what they had going. It's no big deal. I do that some, you know, I do questionable work from time to time, but this is what we're going to use. This is just a nice little waterproof relay, so we'll use this to run, I think I'm only going to be using this to run the fuel pump. So that's where we're at. You know, it's funny the things that you notice while you're here working. I'm sitting here looking at the sled. And I'm looking at this tunnel, and I've installed a few CR tunnels on Yamaha Nitros over the years. And I'm looking and I'm like, you know, right on that brace. I was like, oh, that brace comes up short on the bulkhead. And obviously it comes up short on the bulkhead. That brace is an M10 brace. And then I'm thinking, well, where are all the rivets that rivet the tunnel to the tunnel bracket? There are none. They just have like 10 rivets basically in a straight line, pretty much. I mean, up the side, and it looks like they used good rivets. I mean, thank goodness they used a decent rivet there. But that right here, this area where there's no rivets, should look like this. Should have all these rivets in here, like this one does. This is what I installed this tunnel. This is what it looks like when you put in all the rivets. So, unfortunately, I'm hopping off of the electrical for a moment, and I'm gonna do some rivet work here real quick, and then back to electrical work. What a mess, what a mess. Anyways, we're gonna put at least more of the right amount of rivets. I can't make fun of anybody because I'm a horrible mechanic myself. I'm not good at, I'm a jack of all trades but a master of none for sure. So anybody that is a good metal worker is probably laughing at the work I do, or anybody that's a good electrician or whatnot is probably laughing at the work I do. And I get it, so I'm not trying to beat up on these people too much, but man, this is so many missing rivets that held the tunnel on. And you don't know what you don't know. They probably didn't even know that you needed to put all of these rivets in also. But for anybody that's gonna buy a 20-year-old sled or a 15-year-old sled or whatever this thing is, and then start dumping a bunch of money into it buying a tunnel, this is how you do it. Back to time lapse. I'll get this all wired and hooked up. Note to self as far as wiring goes: if you're gonna buy your wiring off somewhere cheap, that's fine, but wherever you buy your wire from, you should make sure that it says oxygen free copper. When you're working on something like a snowmobile like this, what you're not looking for is copper clad aluminum. Copper clad aluminum is about half the price. It lasts about half as long. And what we're really worried about with the CCA is corrosion control. Not abrasion control, we're worried about corrosion. So it's always good to use a good oxygen free copper. Alright, well here's where we've gotten. With the aeromotive fuel pressure regulator and just some fittings that I had to be able to get a fuel pressure gauge on. Snow's on the way, so I did have to cut some corners on some things. This did not get polished. The arms on the rear skid did not get powder coated. I was going to powder coat those white. That's not happening this go around. I guess that's kind of the budget build thing going. I'm almost done with the coolant over here. I just got a little bit more to finish up down here, but I'm putting in a provision for a second water temp gauge. I do use aluminum 90s for coolant when I got to go through areas where there's like a bunch of jagged stuff that could go and eventually rub through a hose. And then I even protect it when it goes through a jagged area. You can use hose 90s and hose U's where they're not going to be in an abrasive situation, but I use aluminum through there. So the coolant's pretty much dialed in. The electrical is pretty much dialed in. This feeds the relay on the other side. This feeds the relay on this side. The relay on this side's right here. That'll run the primary fuel pump and the secondary fuel pump. Got a relay over here that I've tucked away with a couple more fuses. One fuse is for the boosted box, one fuse is for the fuel injectors, and this relay runs both the boosted box and the fuel injectors. The supplementary fuel injectors. Stock fuel injectors are still ran off of the stock ECM. Matter of fact, a little bit about the electrical system on this. The stock ECM will start the snowmobile and run the snowmobile as stock. So this snowmobile is not even aware, as far as electronics goes, that it has a turbo kit on it. When you go and talk about Yamaha's old logo was a tuning fork, because Yamaha are notorious for being excellent tuners, and you can be certain that the fuel mapping and the tuning on this snowmobile is as good as it got when they put it out to market. So it's not like we're going to go and add in a piggyback fuel controller and somehow improve what Yamaha's done. Yamaha did such a good job, we just left it alone. So this snowmobile will start like it's stock, it will idle like it's stock, and when you slap the throttle, besides the heavy weights that we're going to be slinging and the little timing adjustment that I've made, it's going to accelerate like stock. But once the turbo crosses about 4 pounds of boost, the stock fuel injectors will no longer be able to keep up. They're going to be approaching 80 or 90% of their duty cycle at that point. And as you approach 90% duty cycle on an electronic device, you're going to start losing consistency of output. So at that point, we'll start going and running the supplementary injectors. So at about 3 or 4 pounds of boost, we'll start adding fuel through those injectors, and those things are facing right down the throttle bodies. Each fuel injector for its own throttle body. And because we're running a trigger, the number 1 cylinder here, this fuel injection event will correspond with the fuel injector event that's inside that particular throttle body. And because these injectors fire sequentially like these injectors do, there won't just be an open spray of these injectors when the boost come on. It's when the boost comes on, this injector sprays when it's supposed to, this injector sprays when it's supposed to, this injector sprays when it's supposed to, and then this one does it again. And what happens by doing that is, one, based on the air-fuel ratio that the ECM of the snowmobile is reading, it's going to be reading that the air-fuel ratio is fine. So it's not going to be trying to add any more fuel. It's going to be like, oh, the air-fuel ratio is just dandy. So I'm going to be running the stock fuel injectors probably like right around 60 or 70% duty cycle, right where they're happy. And then these injectors will probably also be running at like 40 or 50% duty cycle where they're really happy also. So that way we're getting plenty of fuel that we need for the horsepower. So this is not going to be a situation where this sled, where this thing's going to run lean. That's all triggered off of this, and I went and this was their stuff. So I just added onto theirs. This is my connector, and I color code them, so I did the zip ties just in case I have to use multiple connectors, because unlike the Yamaha ones, these will all plug right into each other. So that's how I like to do my connectors. Here's the power for that relay. I still got to get a fuse in there, but anyways, that's as clean as I can get the wiring on these. I try to minimize the wiring on these things, but it's just tough to do. Any wiring that I added, I use a marine grade wire that's also contained for abrasion resistance. You've heard me say that plenty, abrasion resistance. I like abrasion resistance. The last thing I want is a sled shorting out in the middle of the mountains. So yeah, moving right along. Here's what I've got going with the post forward kit. I use this amp thing off that sled. I'm not trying to rob Peter to pay Paul, but I really, for this setup with the intercooler up here, this really works a lot better than anything else I'm gonna get. I did have to modify it a little bit for clearance. But yeah, this thing's coming along. I don't know, either it's gonna be a pile of crap or it's gonna be fast and fun, one of the two. I'm hoping it's gonna be the latter. I'd like to see this thing be fast and fun. Here's those rivets. I could not believe that this tunnel was not riveted on. The tunnel was only held on by a few. I don't know if they didn't know. I will say when you get the tunnel, there's not like, I've installed a few of these CR tunnels. I installed that one and I've done a couple others on twin sleds. You know, there's no instructions, but man, if you're already at the point where you're installing a tunnel, you ought to know a little basic engineering, like a little basic mechanical ability. And you should also just know that you got to have rivets, good rivets, tight rivets. So, anyways, that's where we are with this project. I'm going to go to bed for the night, but we'll be moving right along. I'll be building the rear skid here in the next couple days. I'll be rebuilding the chain case. I'll be doing the drivers tomorrow. The drivers will happen tomorrow, so yeah, there we are.